His legs are fastened to an iron frame. The soles of his feet are slathered with a thick layer of grease, after which the roasting begins. He screams in pain as his interrogators use pincers to place hot coals within his already burned toes. If the victim doesn't die, he'll end up like the others, insane. And what's the reason for this odious torture, you might ask? The answer is, the man has been accused of heresy. Was he a heretic? Well, let's just say after days of torture, he might have confessed to anything. But as you'll see today, perhaps the Knights Templar, once heroes of the highest degree, were a victim of terrible conspiracy, or maybe they were devil-worshipping cultists, and that's what we'll investigate in this show. The foot roasting thing was indeed real. It was actually just one of the many tortures that some of the Knights Templar themselves endured. Tortures, as we said, that drove some insane. On top of foot roasting, they were also deprived of sleep, starved, and some were subjected to the dreaded strappado. You probably don't know what that is, but you will, soon enough. First of all, some of you might be wondering who the Knights Templar were. They were formed as a Roman Catholic military order back in the 1100s. These fearless warriors of Christ were a super elite fighting force, knocking down and slaughtering anyone who stood in their way or wasn't exactly a big believer in Christianity. Basically, they were God's army, at least in the eyes of the Catholic Church, which stood behind them and backed them up. As well as a fighting force, these people became extraordinarily wealthy. Sure, some of them were good with the sword, but many of them were also nobles who were better at counting coins than they were at counting severed heads. At one point, only 10% of them were actual combatants, while the others were just powerful men with bags full of gold. Founded in Jerusalem in 1118, they fought what's called the Crusades. These were religious wars that went on from 1095 to 1291. In Jerusalem, the Holy Land, the Templars battled with those fighting for the Islam faith, but all over Europe and beyond, they fought people accused of heretical beliefs. The Holy Land was conquered by a Muslim Arab in the 7th century, thereby taking it from the Christians. The Christians wanted it back. That's why the First Crusade happened. More crusades came after, and more power was accorded to the Templars as well as more money. As tends to happen when you accrue massive wealth, at some point, someone will want to take your power away. In the case of the Knights Templar, this person was King Philip IV of France. Not surprisingly, when he started saying all manner of bad things about the Templars, he owed them tons of money. In the beginning, there were just 7 knights, headed by a French knight from Champagne named Hugh de Pan. He and the other knights swore to serve the church, and while doing that, live a simple life. Since they helped take Jerusalem back from the Muslims and kept on protecting Christian pilgrims in Jerusalem from harm, they received many donations. This helped to grow the order, with many of the knights seeing that they could do pretty well from collecting donations of land and cash. At the same time, they used the cash to build a stronger army. We won't go into their long history of many battles. We think you got the picture. This band of men grew exceptionally wealthy. They invested their cash, and they got into a form of banking. The majority of them hailed from France, but there were Templars in other countries, such as England and Germany. With businesses here, there, and everywhere, they'd been called the world's first multinational corporation. They'd often sign up in their 20s on the promise of adventure and a stable living. While the actual knights might have only numbered in the hundreds, when they went to battle, they did so sometimes with the large infantry that they'd raised, as well as mercenaries. Mercenaries didn't get many of the perks the Templars did, so while they fought side by side, they got their pay and were happily sent on their way. When a new Templar joined up, they swore obedience to the top dog, called the Grand Master. They also swore to serve God and do so while living a simple life without many of the worldly pleasures that people enjoyed, including the company of women. But don't let that poverty thing fool you. To become a member, you almost always had to have connections and money. As one historian put it, the first Templars swore oaths of chastity and poverty, but the only people that need to swear an oath of poverty are those who aren't poor to begin with. It was actually all these rules and codes of conduct that ruined them. Such rules would sound to some people like a kind of secret society, and back in those days, the church could become quite suspicious of secret pacts made by men. The rules included taking that vow of poverty, but they also dictated what they wore, what they ate, where they slept, who they socialized with, and at one point it said they had hundreds of such rules. Here are some examples translated to English. It should be sufficient for you to eat meat 3 times a week except at Christmas, All Saints, the Assumption, and the Feast of the 12 Apostles. For it is understood that the custom of eating flesh corrupts the body. We prohibit pointed shoes and shoelaces, and forbid any brother to wear them, for it is manifest and well known that these abominable things belong to pagans. We prohibit and firmly forbid any brother to recount to another brother nor to anyone else the pleasures of the flesh. No craftsman brother, neither one from the prison nor any other, should strike a slave in such a way that he places irons round his neck without permission if he has deserved it. None should put him in a pillory nor pierce him with a sword without permission, but he should beat him. These went went on, and the more rules there were, the more mysterious the Templars became to outsiders. That's why when some people thought they'd gotten too big for their boots, there was an excuse to go after them. Maybe it would be easy enough to convince some people that part of their rituals included getting a bit too close to the devil. King Philip IV of France heard rumors that there was corruption in the Knights Templar, while other people just worried about their power and the fact that they pretty much acted as they wanted. The king, being in debt after his war with England, seized the opportunity to discredit the Templars. It's also said that they lent him 500,000 lira for his sister's dowry. On September 14, 1307, a secret order was given by the king to arrest all Knights Templar in France. Pope Clement V, who, let's remember, was the real boss in town, didn't know about this and was apparently angered at first. But it happened anyway, and on October 13th, the king's soldiers rounded up all the Templars they could find. The Pope then changed his stance, and on November 22nd, he issued a papal decree that stated all European monarchs, by order of the Church, must seize the lands of the Templars. This order went out to England, Germany, Italy, Iberia, and Cyprus. Grand Master Jacques de Molay was arrested, as were many others. If this sounds like a conspiracy to take riches off people, it will seem more like that soon. The charges at first were heresy. One document states the Templars did these things during their initiation ceremony. While professing, the brothers were required to deny Christ, to spit on the cross, and to place 3 obscene kisses on the lower spine, the navel, and the mouth. They were obliged to indulge in carnal relations with other members of the order, if requested. And finally, they wore a small belt which had been consecrated by touching a strange idol, which looked like a human head with a long beard. Worshipping idols. That was a bit of no-no in those days because those false idols were often presumed to be related to the devil. Then on August 12, 1308, another charge read that they worshipped a kind of cat and a 3-faced figure. Importantly, no objects or drawings of these idols were ever produced during the trials. The thing is, when your feet are being roasted and you haven't slept for a week, a person tends to do what's asked of them. A main trial in France consisted of 138 men, and all of them admitted their guilt. One man, who remains unnamed, was tortured and said during a ceremony he was told, "Adore this head. This head is your God and your Muhammad." Some scholars have now said that perhaps Muhammad was Muhammad, but when the new recruits were told to worship Muhammad, it could have been in the context of them being taken prisoner by the Muslims. Maybe it was kind of a capture and interrogation exercise similar to what special forces go through these days as part of their training. When you consider that some of the knights were tortured with what's called the strappado, you can understand why they would confess to such things. The torture consisted of tying a person's arms around their back, then fastening their wrists to a rope. That rope would then be lifted, with the injury often being the dislocation of their shoulders. The pain would have been incredibly intense, especially if the rope was jerked around a bit. At first, the men said their confessions had not been made after torture, but importantly, some of them later said that they'd actually been tortured. Let's take the case of Grand Master Jacques de Molay. Not only had he been on bad terms with the king, but historians now say that Molay seemed to think that he didn't have to answer to anyone, not even the Pope. He was also very rich, and the king wanted Molay's wealth, as well as the other Templars' wealth, to become part of the royal treasury. On October 24th, royal agents at the University of Paris tortured Molay. There is a sketch showing that he was subjected to foot roasting. You won't be surprised then to hear that he confessed. He admitted that part of the Templars' initiation ceremony consisted of denying Christ and trampling the cross. Then in December, 2 cardinals visited Molay in Paris at the behest of the Pope. The Pope wanted them to hear Molay's side of the story. That's when Molay retracted his confession. This went back and forth. Another time, the cardinals asked Molay if he was guilty of the accusations, but this time the king's men were also in the room. Surprise, surprise, Molay now said he was guilty again. Later, he retracted that confession another time. Meanwhile, lesser Templars had already confessed and were subsequently burned at the stake. 54 were executed in France, while others in Europe were subjected to torture and eventually killed. In some countries, Templars managed to evade execution, but spent the rest of their lives in prison. Some were acquitted, but their land and wealth was confiscated. Molay was finally executed too. By this time, he might have been glad to get it over with. In March 1314, he and another Templar, Geoffrey de Charnay, were sent to the scaffold. An account of the execution states, by sunset, a pyre was erected on a small island in the Seine, the Ile de Juif, near the palace garden. There, de Molay, de Charnay, de Gonneville, and de Parade were slowly burned to death, refusing all offers of pardon and retraction, and bearing their torment with a composure which won for them the reputation of martyrs among the people, who reverently collected their ashes as relics. Many people were naturally suspicious that both these men, as well as all the other Templars who were tortured and killed, were innocent of any crime. People saw it for what it was, the church and state conspiring to take those men's wealth and destroy the Templar order. In fact, there was a wide-held belief that killing the Templars created a curse on the conspirators. That's because Pope Clement died from a terrible disease just over a month after the execution, and the king died from a cerebral stroke while hunting just a few months later. His sons and heirs died young and didn't have any male children, thereby ending his natural male bloodline. Rumors throughout Europe said that the Templars might have had a crooked trial down on Earth, but the real trial was up in heaven, where God looked unfavorably on the king and the Pope. Not many modern scholars will tell you that they think the Templars actually performed devilish rituals. While they might have taken advantage of their position, they were certainly no more unethical than the church or the state. As one historian said about the trials, these people were looking for anything that could be used against the Templars, but the researchers found very little. We can see this from the records of the Templars' trials in 1307. Before he died, Pope Clement disbanded the organization, and so that was the end of the Templars. Although a few hundred years later, Freemasonry would get off the ground and have its own strange secret initiations and codes of conduct. These were based on what the Templars did. Now, you need to watch What Did the Mysterious Secret Society of Freemasons Actually Do? Or have a look at Illuminati versus Bilderberg Group. How do they compare? Secret Society Comparison.